1, 2, 3, 4.
When you saw your mother's diamonds, did you recollect the pain that she doesn't care that you were forgotten son? If I showed you that the oceans were just a drop of rain, would it lead you back to the day you lost the war? I don't mean to bring you down before tomorrow, but I need to leave you there before we've lost the sun. I don't mean to bring you down too high.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stench of Truth here at my new home on the Inception Radio Network. I want to give my thanks to Inception Radio Network and Jamie Havokin for extending the invitation to join the network. So I'm very pleased to be here on July 1st, 2011. And the show will be airing at the same time, and that is 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on InceptionRadioNetwork.com. So please join us and join the network. It's a great place to be, and I'm really happy to be here. And for my debut episode, I have both the authors Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, and we're going to be talking about the Stargate Conspiracy and the channeled entities known as the Nine. Before I get into an introduction into their material and introduce our guests to you, I just wanted to say a note of thanks to my very good friend Vocal Brush from YouTube, who is an artist and songwriter, and she's the musician that provides the intro and outro music for the show, and that was a song at the beginning there, a little snippet of, called Manchurian Sun. And so if you like the music, stop by her website at YouTube. That's youtube.com/user/vocalbrush, VOCALBRUSH, and let her know that you like it. So I'm your host, Ted Torbich. Again, this is the Stench of Truth Radio at my new home here at InceptionRadioNetwork.com. For my debut, I have Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. They are the authors of the Stargate Conspiracy. And the Stargate Conspiracy is one of the more interesting books that you're going to find on several different fronts, because it does talk about channeled entities known as the Nine that were channeled to a group of people who were amongst some of the most well-to-do people in the United States, very upper-crust people, very rich. And for many, many years, they had secret meetings where these entities channeled messages to them. And some very interesting characters were either directly or peripherally involved with the Nine and the group of people that channeled those entities during that period of time. One notable example is Gene Roddenberry, who, as you know, was the creator of Star Trek and some of its spin-offs. But Lynn and Clive probably have written, they've written many books, and a lot of them are very important works. And this one, certainly, there's no shortage of controversy about some of the topics that they discuss, and certainly this book is not short on controversy itself. But it is a very definitive look at the group, and it is a pretty good explication of the material as it was handed down to us in the form of what could be uncovered about the activities of this group. And one of the principal players was Andrija Puharich, and some of you may recognize that name in association with Yuri Geller, but there's a lot more to the story, and I think what I'll do is I'll just bring on our guests, Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. We'll bring them on the line now, and we'll get right into the discussion.
They're on with you.
Okay, are you guys there?
Hello. Hi.
Okay. Before we get on discussing the book, I wanted to just say that if you want to find out more information about Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, please go to their official website at www.picknett-prince.com. That's Picknett-Prince, all one word, .com, and there you can find links to all their books and a brief biography on them and where they're going to be and what they're doing and news about them and all that kind of good stuff. So definitely bookmark that page if you want to keep track of their material and get on to their books and whatever else they have going on at this particular time. So welcome, guys. The first question that I wanted to ask you was, I know that you have a lot of very esoteric topics that you like to discuss. I mean, your books are a very broad selection of sort of occultic material, maybe dashed with a little bit of alchemy and etc. What got you into looking into the Nine and looking into Andrija Puharich and the Stargate Conspiracy itself?
Well, I think it was. It's a story we've followed for a long time because just when you're interested in the paranormal and things, as we were in the 1970s and 1980s, and you're interested in Uri Geller, you obviously come across the name Andrea Puharich, and you keep picking up little snippets about this group called the Nine, and that's when we thought, let's rather than just rely on these bits that have been kind of drip-fed to us and little references here and there, let's sit down and find out what we can just about the whole story, because, it's one of those stories, you can put it together you put the same information, the same chronology together from two entirely different perspectives. One is that there is this, that there are these entities that are trying to contact and help mankind by providing information to very prominent individuals. But you can put this together in a different way to give a much more conspiratorial perspective, and it actually comes down to what you think about Andrea Puharich and the nature of these channeled contacts, whether you think they're genuine or that they were being manipulated.
Yes, and in fact, it sounds impossible put baldly like this, but, we discovered through, painstaking, sort of line-by-line type research that, in fact, the contacts from the Nine, or what boiled down to the Nine, have been going on for 60 years, but actually manipulated, it seems very obvious to us now, being manipulated in some way or another by the intelligence agencies, perhaps simply as an experiment to see in belief, because it's known that they do this. The UK's intelligence agency, MI5, they do this. The CIA do this. It's well known. And were the Nine simply, part of that? Or is there something deeper to it? Do the Nine exist objectively? Or are they just simply in the minds of the people? You can go on forever like this, but it's fascinating and very disturbing too.
Yes, the thing that gets me with it is of course, as you say, is it something that really exists? Are we dealing with discarnate entities of some kind? One thing that I found was rather interesting, I wanted to ask your opinion on, was had you come across the supposed 9 unknown men of Emperor Asoka, the Indian emperor, and had you ever drawn a connection between the two?
Yes, well, I know that there is a connection. There was this, these legends that came from the Far East that were kind of adopted by various esoteric writers in Europe in the 19th century about the 9 unknown men that are the sort of 9 secret rulers of the world. You keep finding groups of 9 in all kinds of esoteric disciplines, all kind of esoteric systems of belief. For example, the original Knights Templar were formed by 9 knights. So a lot of this kind of lore, traditions connected with powerful groups of 9 seems to have fed into the contact with the 9 or the Council of 9 that we're talking about, the channeled contacts. And it's another one of those things that becomes very unclear about. These recurring themes are presented in the channeled material as if it's confirming the existence, confirming these realities or the reality of these traditions that go back a long way. But of course, these things could be being shaped by those traditions. Somebody could be reading these books about 9 unknown men and 9 Knights Templars, and ultimately, the big group of 9. Going way back is the 9 major gods of ancient Egypt, which the channeled entities claim to be, which is where the story kind of opens out, in great historical and cosmic dimensions. It's trying to, these traditions, like the 9 unknown men, are around, but we're never sure which bit is shaping which. Is somebody taking those traditions and creating a new system of belief based on them? It's certainly presented to us as if we're supposed to believe that this vindicates these ancient traditions, but we're not so sure. In fact, we're quite sure that there's a lot more manipulation going on than that.
Do you suppose that at the very base, what we're dealing with, as you point out quite rightly, the number 9 does appear quite frequently in association with the various groups and in various sort of occult numerical structures and that sort of thing. Do you suppose it is possible, as you have pointed out and as you had said, it might be just manipulation, that they use these numbers simply for the symbolic effect that they have on people?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the number 9, it has specific associations esoterically anyway, and indeed mathematically. And don't ask me what they are, please don't. But I mean, the number 9, as it were, building up to the 1 and the 0 of the 10 is very important, and it, has been seen to be very important over the years. So, that's a sort of separate matter. So 9 would be, apart from maybe 7, but 9 would be the number to go for if you were going to create a council of a certain number, that would have an esoteric ring to it. But as Clive said, the 9 in question were the 9 major gods of ancient Egypt, the Ennead, which means the 9, and their spokesman to the mediums and channelers started off by calling himself Tom, and then revealed that he was actually Atom, the creator god. But I'm sure that you have thoughts on this, but we think there is something very suspicious about the fact that the 9, the Council of 9, the channeled entities, just don't sound at all like the ancient Egyptian gods. They don't have much in common with them at all.
No. And in fact, one of the things that would cause me to have the greatest concern about anything that happened with the original group of people that got together to meet and channel these entities is the fact that Andrija Puharich was involved, and he has a very distinctive and interesting past. And some of the things that he had been involved with would call into question some material that he might have been involved with in later years, like this particular episode.
Well, he was certainly involved at the very time that the 9 contacts first started. This is in the early 1950s. He was certainly involved in army psychological warfare experiments that were linked to it is the usual suspects. It's the CIA's MK-Ultra experiments.
Right.
That's what I was saying earlier. You can tell the story in two ways. One is the way they want it to be told, and the other when you dig behind and find out what's really going on. And just as an example of that, the first channeled contact, the Council of Nine, have been channeled by many different people over the last 50, 60 years. And for a long time, they were all people connected with Puharich. But the very first channeling happened in 1952 at this place called the Round Table Foundation in Maine, which was ostensibly a foundation that was set up to research parapsychology, worked with mediums. Some very famous mediums of the time were brought there, and experiments were done with them into their abilities. And during this, at one point, one of the subjects they were working with began to channel these entities that introduced themselves as the Nine. Didn't at that time link themselves to Egypt or anything. That all came later, but it initiated this ongoing series of contacts that went through many different channelers and mediums. Now, the Round Table Foundation was connected to it involved some very high-level people. Puharich's kind of second in command there was a man named Arthur Young, who is well known to a lot of people as a kind of esoteric philosopher. He was married to Ruth Forbes Payne, who's one of the Forbes family. She was part of the initial group that listened to this channeling. Alice Bouverie, who was part of the Astor family, was part of this group as well. So immediately it's involving some very rich and influential people. The foundation was funded, at least in part, by Henry Wallace, who had been vice president under Roosevelt, a decade before. So we're talking right from the start. It's reaching these very high-level people. And that's the official story, that these contacts happened at the Round Table Foundation and these people just sat and listened to these things. When you actually dig behind this Round Table Foundation, you actually find there was more to it than that. It was actually secretly being funded by the Pentagon to do research into paranormal abilities, to psychic abilities, that the Pentagon didn't want to admit that it was really doing. And Puharich was actually, at that stage, a captain in the U.S. Army, although, he didn't let on about this. So right from the start, you've got two different pictures. The one they're telling you that this contact just happened at this place, but then you realise behind it, you've got, it is the usual suspects, the Pentagon and CIA, but they're there. It's documented, but you have to dig out that documentation.
One little side note, if I could mention, one of my past guests on my show had noted that it was Ken Thomas had noted that during the time of the Kennedy assassination, that actually Ruth Payne was visiting the area up there, and possibly was, connecting with the people who are involved with the Nine just prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So there is a peripheral connection between the Forbes Payne family and the Paynes in Dallas with JFK assassination as well. Just a little side note there for history folks.
There is that connection, is there, and it's it's quite a scary one when we found it. I have to say, that's one we didn't actually put in the book, because it just, as we were writing it, we were just thinking, if we bring the Kennedy assassination into this, even as an aside, a lot of people are just going to suddenly put the book down at that stage. And say, that's just trying to get everything.
Well, I know you can reach a certain level of credulity at some point in time, even though what you're reporting is actual. I mean, just writing about one particular aspect of this. I mean, you talk about Puharich and his connection with Uri Geller and with various psychic phenomenon, and you talk about channeled entities these, and already you're pushing the limits of credulity for a lot of people. But quite frankly, the world is a lot stranger place than most people are willing to give credit to.
Absolutely.
So, you know,
me, Ted, is
yes.
You know, the different, obviously the different quality of the channeled material, or the different quality of experience of the nine, because Clive was saying earlier this evening, actually, that, you know, we only have, from talking about one of the channelers of the nine, one of the most famous ones, Phyllis Schlemmer. She's been channeling them for years and years, and she's only published a very small book, basically. So there must be a huge amount of material that is simply not deemed, you know, pertinent for one reason or another, to put out there so the rest of us can read it. And, you know, one wonders exactly what's in there. And indeed, one wonders exactly what was channeled that hooked these famous, rich, cutting-edge people. What was it? Because Uri Geller, when he was involved, he said that, you know, the nine were like pranksters. He said they're like a civilization of clowns. So it must have been very different. What was coming through must over the years have been very different from time to time. You know, the quality of what was said and the content of what was said.
Now, that's really the question, isn't it? Because when you look at the individuals who are involved with this group and who are involved with it over such a long period of time, very powerful, very wealthy, very influential people, old money families in the United States, one has to wonder, is this just parlor game trickery? You know, just to use a sort of a coin of phrase there, or are these people getting, you know, solid information that they can use either to further their power and or wealth? But if that's the case, then exactly as you have pointed out, the material that we have seen as far as what has been released from the channeling sessions is nothing like that at all. So there must be another set of materials, as it were, that would hook these people and keep them involved for such a long period of time.
Well, I mean, it is like a religion in many respects, and of course it's like a religion with an inner and outer circle. You know, the inner initiates, who are obviously the rich, the wealthy, the powerful people, and the rest of us. You know, so it's like a religion on many levels, really.
Yes, indeed, and the obviously, you know, that was one of the things that struck me very poignantly about the story. First of all, with Puharich's involvement, this guy is almost an enigma himself. I mean, he's a very charismatic person. One can be taken away very easily by him speaking, and I could see him persuading people quite easily. He's very casual, very nonchalant, but I think that upon closer examination, you could see someone who has the ability to manipulate. But we're not dealing with people who are outside the realms of this. These people would have been masters at doing this, having been raised in an environment that they were in. So I don't see any of these people getting taken by a quote-unquote mythology, you know, it's created around this sort of a channeled business with the nine. Do you suppose that the evolution of the nine and their eventual identification of themselves with ancient Egypt had more to do with this story that they were trying to present to the public as far as what their message was, or was this something integral to the entire experience?
Again, it's one of those things, it's hard to come to a firm opinion about it, because it wasn't until I think it was 1973-74, but this, what was then the main channeled entity, Tom, who they just assumed was just a name he picked up to make himself appear more cuddly and friendly. But one day, and it was actually in response to a question asked of Phyllis Schlemmer when she was channeling Tom, a question asked by Gene Roddenberry, who was a part of this group that met around and fired questions at Tom through the channel. It was only at this point that one day, in response to a question by Gene Roddenberry, suddenly announced that he's Atom, who in ancient Egypt of the most ancient times, the time of the religion of the pyramid builders, Atom was their creator god. He was like that, the chief god of the 9 major gods. So that is something that only emerges after the thing's been running for over 20 years. And yet, when you actually go back to the very original communications, back at the Round Table Foundations in the early 50s, there what seemed to be clues in there, sort of hints, things that would sort of links to Egypt and to the pyramids and specifically to that religion that do make you wonder, that do make you think this whole thing was part of an evolution, but the seed was there from the beginning. But then again, you have to then go back to Puharich being this tricksy character, and you think, was it designed that way so that at the most dramatic moment you could suddenly take everything up a gear by suddenly revealing that these extraterrestrial cosmic intelligences are even more than that. They are the gods that basically kicked off human civilization. So you can never be sure, because Puharich, as you said, charismatic person, but the absolute arch manipulator, in the sense that he devoted his life and his training to find all different techniques of manipulation. For example, he was a master hypnotist. And what would always happen, that when a new channeler would come into the 9 story, you'd always find that somebody that was already known for their abilities as a medium or a psychic in some ways, that Puharich would bring them in, that he would get them to start channeling, then he would hypnotize them. And when they're in hypnotic trance, he did this to Uri Geller, for example, when very soon after they first met, he would hypnotize them and then get them to channel extraterrestrial entities. And when you look at some of the sessions they had, he was asking them what seemed to be very leading questions that were basically implanting in the medium's mind, or the channeler's mind, this particular scenario. So you begin to suspect, is he sort of humanly creating this as some kind of experiment, maybe an experiment on seeing whether you could contact these entities, whether they would actually sort of play along with his game.
Yes, I mean, I think that is quite likely if we assume that there are such things as separate entities, invisible entities, which I certainly do, to find ways of, as it were, opening portals, so these creatures, whatever they are, these entities, were, as it were, welcomed in. Certainly we know he also used psychoactive drugs, sort of, not just on himself, but as a sort of experimental thing. Obviously, to see if he could make people psychic chemically, as well as psychologically, But I think it was possibly all about, opening portals, opening minds to see what would happen.
I think we have a, if not a firm bit of evidence for it. We certainly have the implication over the years that with the kind of investigations and programs that have been conducted by the military and the intelligence agencies and others into psychic phenomenon and related mind control type things, which admittedly are controversial but nonetheless very real. That there is a strong implication that altered states of consciousness do make one open to outside influences, if we could say that. What those influences are is a matter of debate, of course. But I think there's a very strong implication that inducing altered states of consciousness, whether through hypnosis or through chemical means or even psychotronic means, could very well be used to open people's minds to communication with some other agency, whatever that agency might be.
Well, yes, and Puharich, I mean, he was a strange guy. He basically had no ethics. I mean, because as far as he was concerned, he couldn't afford to have ethics. You know, he was eager for knowledge and for discovery. You know, he was a kind of explorer. I'm not building him up to make him a hero. In my mind, he certainly wasn't. But you know, he had this sort of cold eagerness for knowledge, and he was actually a trained shaman himself. He was a kahuna of the Hawaiian tradition. So obviously, you know, he knew what it was like to be in an altered state, no matter how you'd created that, and perceive other worlds, if you like. So he personally knew that. And he obviously was taking it on as far as he could go with any means he could lay his hands on, with other people.
Yes, it's always with other people. It's always the experiments of other people.
You know, he had experienced it himself he was a trained kahuna from the Hawaiian tradition of shamanism.
And I guess if you have people in that position who quote unquote go bad, that's probably one of the worst situations that you could have happen, because shamanic tradition is designed to help people from the very beginning, and if that is turned to what one might call the dark arts, it's certainly not going to be a good thing in the end, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, a lot of bad things happened over the course of this Nine story. I mean, there were, a couple of people along the way committed suicide. Some even got to the brink of suicide. So it wasn't a pleasant story. When I'm talking about the actual people involved in the channeling, a lot of them, did cause them a great deal of kind of psychological upset and disturbance. Puharich was quite ruthless about that. There were things, although he was certainly working for all kinds of government agencies, doing all kinds of different research, but there was also, I think, a personal thing with him. In a way, he's using those agencies to carry out the work that he wants to do, because he wants to know. The one thing that seems to drive Puharich throughout his career is that he wants to know how far you can go with, when people claim to be in touch with sort of discarnate entities, are they really, or is it something in their own subconscious? And if they are really kind of discarnate entities, how far can you go with contacting? How far can you trust what they tell you? How far can you manipulate what they tell you? And it's I think, although he's working for these agencies, and he certainly was, but he's got his own personal agenda too. That he's got this knowledge, whether he wants that knowledge or he wanted this knowledge. He died in the mid-90s. Whether he wanted to use that for some personal means, or it was just a thirst to understand these things. Again, we don't know, because for someone who was quite a prominent figure in the parapsychological world, he's still extremely elusive and hard to pin down.
And he was a bully. I mean, he was a bully through chemicals. He was a bully through hypnosis. He was generally a bully. And I've just remembered, many years ago, in the 1980s, I worked on what was over here an iconic publication, which was called The Unexplained, which was about mysteries of mind, space, and time. And we had in the office once a visitor, an American lady, who, I don't remember her name, I'm afraid, but she had been involved with Puharich at some point, and she had been hypnotized by him regularly for, a month, say twice a week for a month. And after that, she began to hallucinate. He couldn't be bothered with her after that, but she began to hallucinate. She was hallucinating all over the place. Her marriage broke down because she was living in a world of her own. She was sort of mentally fraying at the edges. She had poltergeist attacks at home, and she basically, just her whole world fell apart. And she tried to contact him and say, "Please help me," and she just got the brush off, basically. So that, that's not a nice story.
No, indeed. But what she's relating there is something that we see rather frequently in this type of milieu, is the blending of different kinds of phenomenon. She's experiencing hallucinations and poltergeist-like activity after having hypnosis sessions with Puharich, and this is another thing that causes a lot of incredulity with people, because there is such an overlap of rather bizarre and some people would say unbelievable things that go hand in glove with each other whenever you're dealing with things of this nature.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in your research and in your study you have seen this more than once, because I know I have in connection with several different things that I've investigated and looked into. So it's not altogether surprising. But perhaps it is somewhat surprising that someone purporting to provide a service in an attempt to help someone would leave them hanging, as it were, like Puharich did with this woman.
Yeah.
And I imagine that at some point there was a break also with Puharich and Uri Geller as well, was there not?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so it could have been at this point. I think Geller had been drawn into this idea of the UFO reality, and the idea that his psychic powers were being given to him by aliens. This was sort of like, if it wasn't openly stated, it was certainly highly implied. I could see that this might be an influence coming from Puharich.
Well, yes, because it was the usual pattern that it was Puharich that went over to Israel when Yuri Geller was first making a name as an entertainer in clubs there with his psychic act. Somebody suggested that Puharich, this is in 1970, suggested that Puharich goes and takes a look at this guy. Puharich does, wants to work with him more. But the second time that he went to Israel to see Yuri Geller. The second time he put him in a hypnotic trance and got him channeling aliens. And Yuri Geller's take on that is actually very interesting, because Puharich brought him over to the States to do some studies of Yuri Geller's abilities. And this was for about 3 years. And then at the end of that third year, that was just the time when Yuri Geller was starting to become basically a media star. And the break between them, I mean, this wasn't one of the channels. I think Puharich probably met his match with Yuri Geller, because Yuri, a strong character. He isn't somebody that Puharich could push around. And, when it came to, the Geller's career taking off in the media, he left. But the interesting about that period is that under hypnotic trance, Yuri Geller regularly channeled the Nine and different entities that work into this cosmic scheme that the Nine are in control of. And he was hypnotized, he did this channeling, but his take on it afterwards, Yuri Geller's take on it, was that because he was in hypnotic trance, he can't remember any of this, so he has less of an opinion than most other people about this. He basically says, you've only got Puharich's word for what happened, for what I said in those hypnotic trances. I don't remember. So Yuri Geller's always kind of played, backed off a little from all this. And it was strange enough, Puharich, who was supposed to be the sober scientist, that was actually making the wilder claims about Yuri Geller at that time, which Yuri was kind of distancing himself from. But certainly everything, Yuri Geller said even if everything that Puharich said happened when he was channeling really did happen, Uri Geller himself still doesn't believe that the Nine who are who they claim to be. He, as Lynn said earlier, he's the one that came up with this idea that they seem to be a civilization of clowns because although they seem to be real entities, they just seem to be playing around most of the time.
Well, that's perhaps one of the major points, that, they may be real entities, but they are tricksters. And they can, perhaps, throughout history, they've taken different forms for no real reason apart from to be mischievous or downright malicious, or worse. History is littered with stories of people having visions or encountering weird things. And generally speaking, it's not a good thing to encounter these things or to have visions. Especially really the most famous visionaries, such as Joan of Arc, they don't come to a good end. It seems to somehow to go with the territory of being involved with, the angels, demons, aliens, you name it, whatever is fashionable. These creatures will take on the image of what's current, what one believes one would see in an otherworldly situation.
Indeed, and you brought up a very good point there, Lynn, and that is the idea of the trickster element involved in all of this. And one need only look at alien abduction phenomenon, fairy lore, even the jinn, various other paranormal phenomenon, and you can see this manifest itself very clearly. There is this sort of idea that these entities, or whatever they are, whether they're discarnate entities or whether they have some physical form, interdimensional, ultra-terrestrial, whatever you want to call them, they seem to follow no logical pattern. They don't actually do anything with any purpose, or at least not one that we can divine. I always say that when we're dealing with things of this nature, you need to throw out human ideas of morality, of good and evil, and of right and wrong, because these things, whatever they are, they operate on a totally different type of level than we do as people.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Because they're not people, because they're actually a completely different race. They don't. It's a bit like trying to explain to a tiger that it mustn't be angry, it mustn't, eat people. I mean, it just doesn't work. You can't explain to these creatures that they mustn't trick people, they mustn't lie, they mustn't take, a completely fake form. They mustn't masquerade as angels or whatever, and lure people to their doom, essentially, which is what they're good at. Yeah,
indeed,
totally.
and there may be no moral consequences for them. I mean, they may be just doing whatever comes naturally to them, which is something that's really hard for people to grasp. But it's something that's very fundamental, I think, to understanding what the phenomenon is, whatever it is. If we have channeled entities that identify themselves as the ancient gods of Egypt, and what they do is they give us information that largely has nothing to do with ancient Egypt and largely points us in a totally different direction as far as who and what they may be. One needs to call that into question, but at the same time, you need to understand that, and I'm not saying this to you, it sounds like you understand exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying it to the audience, that you really need to divorce yourself from the idea of morality when it comes to these things, because when I hear people talk about, these entities are evil, they're demonic, or they're angels, they're good, or even the cosmic space brother type of thing, you know what I mean, where you have these wonderful aliens who are just waiting to come down and save us from our environmental catastrophe or whatever it happens to be. They're ascribing a goodness or an evilness to these things as if they are human, as if they're anthropomorphizing them, and that is the most dangerous thing that anybody could do when looking at any of this phenomenon.
Yep. Well, I do have to tell you that I once had a close encounter with I'm assuming it was a kind of ultra-terrestrial. When I was a child, I had a vision of this woman's head, and it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And she was talking at me, and she said that I would build a church on a hill, and I'd do all this kind of stuff. And then she was sort of framed by a sort of circle of light, sort of very dim light actually. And then at one point she looked off, as it were off stage. And then she looked down at me and said, "This is absolutely the truth." She looked down at me and said, "You're the wrong one," and then disappeared. But I think it was I had a close encounter there, and the sheer absurdity of it kind of, as it were, at least it made me remember it. But on the other hand, I don't walk around thinking that I'm destined to be some kind of great saint, which is a bit late anyway for that. But or a mover or shaker. At least it put me in my place, didn't it?
I think that's the first time I've ever heard an account like that before, Lynn.
Yep.
You're the wrong one. I got the address wrong. Well, so much for the omnipotence of these beings.
Yeah. Yes, well, at least I know. I mean, a lot of people might be walking around wondering to the ends of their days if they're the chosen one, but I know that I'm not.
It certainly does ease your mind, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
That poor woman, the woman who appeared to me, and she's probably still searching for the right one. She's probably failed her exams, her ultra-terrestrial exams after that.
Yeah, I could see it now. Boy. Now, I wanted you to relate, both of you, to relate some of the, in the end of, we'll get on to, what has happened since the book came out later. But I wanted you to talk about some of the weirdness and strangeness that sort of followed you guys after the book came out and after the research had been put out there for people to look at, and some of the strange things that you guys experienced as a result of the book being published. If you don't mind going into some of that.
Well, the book actually came out in 1999, which so it's quite a while back now. And the reason we wanted to write the book then was because, although we've followed the Nine story for some years, it was just this thought that, or this realization that there's a whole other angle to the book that we haven't gone into yet, which was that during the 1990s, as things were leading up to the millennium, there seemed to us to be what amounted to a deliberate, concerted campaign to feed a lot of this stuff that is linked to the Nine and derives from the Nine, this belief system that is being constructed about them, being the ancient gods of Egypt about to return. That a lot of this was getting through into the mainstream, not necessarily mentioning the Nine in person, but getting into books about the mysteries of ancient Egypt, getting into TV documentaries and things. That was actually hitting quite a mainstream audience that don't read the kind of books that we read, about conspiracies and the esoteric. So we actually wrote the book really to hit a mainstream audience, to say, hang on, there's a whole dimension to all this stuff that you're reading about and seeing on TV that you need to be aware of, because it did seem to be this kind of manipulation leading up towards an event connected with the millennium. So we wrote the book kind of as a warning to people. And we actually think it had its effect, because a lot of things that were planned to happen around the millennium connected with this didn't happen in the end. A lot of people started to go very quiet, some of the Nine channelers. So, in a way, we wrote this book to sort of call their bluff. But we needed to get it out before the millennium, because we thought, if anything is going to happen with this manipulation, creating this, basically setting up this new religion, this new belief system, but when you scratch the surface, actually wasn't that much different to the religions we already had. It's all just about another form of control. Part of it does lead into the alien abduction thing, which was, being talked about a lot again in the mainstream. People that weren't normally interested in UFOs and things were getting very interested in the alien abduction thing, which there's a whole angle to that's in there. It's one of those books that actually ticks every conspiracy box.
But maybe coincidentally, but we were actually still promoting Temple Revelation, which is our previous book, which had just come out in paperback. But the guy who gave us a real amazing platform to give literally as well as figuratively, to give a talk about the Temple Revelation, actually turned out to have worked for MI5 and knew Puharich. And actually, it's only just dawned on me that was quite interesting, really. There was a connection with Templars, with this guy, modern Templars, and but also with the intelligence agencies. He had a lot of friends in the Pentagon. We met some of them. So that was interesting because we were actually sort of I think we were just about to publish, or I can't remember exactly where we were with them.
I think we just about delivered the manuscript and going through the editing process. So it was a while before the book came out. But it all happened around then. Yeah, it did. It was. Yeah, and it was a sort of a very strange mixture, really. The Templars, well, maybe it wasn't that strange, but, the Templars and this guy, Stephen, who we went on to write 3 books with him, and unfortunately he died, but after that, but we wrote 3 books, but not about this kind of thing, actually. We were just about, mainly about the Second World War, conspiracies to do with the Second World War and the British royal family. That's a whole other story.
Indeed.
There's definitely weird stuff connected with that. But one of the, not weird, but just extremely disturbing, really, and unsettling at the time, as it would be. But when the Stargate Conspiracy came out, we had certain authors threatening to sue us, and also, we had a bit of a campaign against us, actually, which wasn't very nice, but then perhaps was only to be expected.
Yeah, with this book, we were kind of, we're putting ourselves in a position that Lynn and I obviously often seem to find ourselves in, that we're getting caught between, if you like, the mainstream and the alternative, or the believers and the skeptics. We're normally right in the middle there, because in the Stargate Conspiracy, we actually kind of knock some of the sacred cows off the alternative scene. Yeah, we ask some questions about why people were trying to foster certain beliefs connected with ancient Egypt. Do you remember there was that whole thing going up to the millennium about, are they going to open the Hall of Records? Mm-hmm. And we actually kind of burst quite a few bubbles there. So it actually, because we're perceived as being part of that alternative scene, it appeared as if we'd kind of turned our back on it. So we did get a lot of flack for writing that book, as Lynn said, particularly from some of the leaders of that field, the leaders, the major writers of that, because we were pointing out some of the errors in what they write. And for a while, we got crossed off a lot of sort of conference lists and things.
Yeah. Well, it was actually, it got quite, it impinged actually on our livelihood, because we were actually blacklisted by some of the biggest publishers in this country after that.
Mm. Yes, as I noted at the beginning, there's certainly a lot of controversy around this book and around the material in general, which it manifested itself over a period of time. And certainly one cannot take out the factor of self-aggrandizement from people, and also vested interests when it comes to certain ideas and ideologies and what have you. But if we are indeed looking at something that was poised, as it were, to become a sort of religion, where you were going to have the Aeneid come back and sort of foster this belief system. It's certainly something that's not unprecedented. We've seen some of this material make its way into the mainstream before. Jacques Vallée talks about this a bit in some of the material that he comes across with UFO cults. And this would be sort of like a derivative of that, not UFOs per se, but discarnate entities that describe themselves as some form of extraterrestrial beings, or at least non-human entities at the very least, and maybe poising themselves at a particular time period where there was a lot of angst and anxiety at the end of the millennium, as it were, coming up to the year 2000, where people perhaps were expecting something interesting or different or new, or perhaps were scared about what the future held. One could very easily see that promoting a kind of religious dogma at that particular point in time might have been very fruitful in establishing itself, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we feared was happening and what it looked like was happening, that this whole thing had been, during the 90s, it had been gradually built up, basically to make this big revelation that the gods of ancient Egypt are back, and that certain people can talk to them, and those certain people can tell you what they're saying. I mean, you mentioned Jacques Vallée there, which was, a big admirer of his writing and his insights. And one of his books, he makes this point that, to people that aren't really into this subject and aren't into UFOs and whatever, it just appears, some kind of fringe thing. But actually, there's a huge potential there to basically create a new religion. I mean, there's a point in one of his books where he says, it's to the first person that can actually find a way to harness all this power that's invested in belief in UFOs, terrestrials, and probably that, if you take it back into history, that the aliens were the people that created us in the first place, and the people that can come back and save us when we're in trouble. Jacques Vallée said, the first people to be able to harness that will have a lot of power to wield, and we could see that happening. That the whole thing was being set up for this revelation that the 9 gods of ancient Egypt are aliens, and they're coming back, and they're going to save you if you sign up to our religion. So that's the thing that concerned us and worried us. That's why we wrote the book. And I think we got in at just the point to get enough people asking questions for them to actually kind of back off from this thing. But it won't have gone away, because all that investment, emotional investment in UFOs and aliens and all those other things is still there. All that potential to be harnessed is still there. Probably they're now working on doing it for 2012 or something. I don't know, but it is, in the end, it was, other than this, what had been for most of 50 years, this kind of interesting story about channelers and Puharich and mind control suddenly seemed to be going somewhere.
Indeed, and that's what we'll do. When we come back, we're going to take a short break here to conduct some business, and when we come back, we'll talk some more about the 9, and we'll talk about some of the things that have happened since the book came out, and I also have some other questions that I want to throw your way regarding Andrija Puharich and some of the other things that he was involved with at the same time as the 9. So we'll take a little break right now, and stay with us, and we'll be back to talk with Lynn and Clive in just a moment or two. So.
Hi, Bob Tarmac for InceptionRadioNetwork.com. I'm going to clue you into a show that I listen to every single week. It's Inception Radio with Jamie Havocan. It airs Friday nights, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Jamie always brings on new guests every single week on a variety of topics. UFOs, it's paranormal, it's time travel, conspiracy theory, it's everything. And Jamie covers it in depth. When does it begin? It's Friday nights, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you there.
Hey guys, Jamie Havocan here to tell you about Haunted Cornwall FM, which is the UK's first and only paranormal radio show. The show covers a wide range of subjects to do with the paranormal and is always open for discussion and debate and is hosted by John. The show can be heard right here on Inception Radio Network, Sundays, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for a 2-hour show. Be sure to check it out. That's the Haunted Cornwall FM radio show, Sundays, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you there.
Hi, Bob Tarmac for Inception Radio Network. I'd like to introduce you to a show that I listen to every week. It's Pang Radio with MJ. MJ has hosts every single week, new hosts every single week, and they talk about everything. They talk about, of course, UFOs, paranormal, but sometimes they just talk about what's in the news. It's a great show. And it airs on Sundays, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. Paying your head. I'll see you there.
Hi, Bob Tarmac here for MJ'sHealthyWay.com. Actually, it's MJ from MJ'sHealthyWay.com and Paying Radio. Why don't you check out my website? We have the best nutritional site in the world. We have all natural products and been doing so for the last 56 years. So if you need that all healthy natural solution, check out MJ'sHealthyWay.com. That's MJ'sHealthyWay.com. Sharing the gift of green naturally.
Hey guys, Jamie Havocan here for UFO Mag. Do you want to receive the best writing there is in ufology, the best writers, editors, and flat out the best magazine that ufology can offer? If so, I highly recommend UFO Magazine. You can check it out at ufomag.com. And if you mention that you heard this on radio, you can get 6 issues for $19.95. Check it out, ufomag.com. Don't miss out. And keep up to date on the hottest topics in ufology. For UFO Mag, this is Jamie Havocan.
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you, and your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Let TalkStream Live transform the way you listen to radio. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mobile talk radio from TalkStream Live. Now available in the iTunes App Store.
What's the story with all the scheming to undermine?
And welcome back to the Stench of Truth here on the Inception Radio Network. Once again, you can join us here 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on InceptionRadioNetwork.com. My guests this evening are Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, authors of the Stargate Conspiracy and other books, which I'll allow them to comment on a little bit later. You can find them on their website, Picknett-Prince.com. That's Picknett-Prince.com, and Picknett-Prince is all one word. And you can find biography, news, future events, and links to all their books there on their website. And we're talking about the 9, Andrija Puharich, and some of the oddities surrounding the channel beings that Puharich had been involved with, and some of the more rich and powerful families in the United States, including the Astors and the Forbes and the Paynes, were involved with over a period of many years. And before the break, I had indicated I wanted to ask you, have you followed the Nine story after the Stargate Conspiracy came out?
Yeah, we've sort of kept an eye on the thing. It seemed to sort of have died down, just at the time of the millennium, just after the book came out. But if you just have a look around the internet, there's still a lot of material relating to the Nine around there. But there's not a lot of stuff happened in terms of new channeled material. If it is, if it is still being channeled, it's not being put out there. But the material that had already been circulating is still very widely available. There are a few books, either about the Nine, commissioned by the people involved in it, or books of, there's a famous book called The Only Planet of Choice, which is full of the sort of channeled, quote, wisdom of the Nine. Which is still being involved. One of the other things that concerned us at the time that we wrote the book was that there seemed to be a kind of almost a concerted effort to take over the New Age through the Nine, in the sense that in the New Age world, there's all manner of channelers channeling all kinds of things all the time. Lots and lots of channeling groups and channeling cults, and it seemed that a lot of those groups were being, quote, realizing that the real source of their wisdom was actually, the Nine. And there seemed to be this attempt to sort of bring the whole thing together and impose some order on it. Because again, just as with the UFO cults, the New Age is a huge subculture. Just sort of economically, it's it's very powerful and something that people would like to control, and harness all that energy. So there seemed to be that kind of effort going on to bring all the channeling things sort of together with the Nine. Now, that hasn't happened. If you look around now, there's still a lot of different channeling groups and channeling cults, but that kind of attempt to take control of the whole lot hasn't happened. We like to think it's because we sounded the warning early enough and alerted people to this. But certainly the Nine are still around. Even Puharich himself died in 1995, so he hadn't been involved in it for a long time. But there are people from those groups that still are.
What is very interesting is if the Nine had been totally fabricated, it was very clever because ancient Egypt is always glamorous. It's got a sort of magical charm all to itself, where ancient Greece, for example, hasn't. Egypt is amazing and very magical just by being there in our heads. And when you've got the ancient Egyptian gods, that's extra glamorous. That's literally awesome, isn't it? So that's very clever to pull together the glamour and the charm, apart from anything else, of ancient Egyptian gods. So the New Age, you can't really blame them, can you? But when they're faced with some creatures that basically are, what they believe are the ancient Egyptian gods, they will leave all discernment at the door. Basically, they'll leave their brains at the door because they just accept anything they're told. Gods, glamorous gods, ancient Egyptian glamorous gods, yes, ticks all the boxes. And you've got a new religion, which is very scary.
Indeed.
It's sort of like a religion sort of made to measure, really.
Yes, and of course, when you go back into the past and some of the more fundamental religious philosophies like those of ancient Egypt and Sumeria and some of the other really old societies certainly have a lot of resonance even today. And as you rightly point out, Egypt has a certain glamour to it, and the gods of Egypt also very. For whatever reason, they have a hook to them that people are drawn to, and there is a fascination with ancient Egyptian culture, probably because of the pyramids and the amazing architecture of their construction, and the length of time that Egypt was a dominating empire, and all of the things that we have seen in relation to them. And certainly one would also have to factor in Hollywood as being a promoter of this as well, with movies and media that sort of glamorize this entire thing as well. So we can definitely see that there is a very strong resonance even today with ancient Egyptian mythology and history and all things Egyptian. So yeah, that really makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Well, they're very powerful images and symbols that you get from Egypt. They're immediately evocative, even after all this length of time, and it makes a lot of sense also from the ancient perspective, the idea that there's an ancient wisdom, and you can't get a lot more ancient than Egypt. But of course, they then link it back, and the whole sort of Nine mythology brings in Atlantis, Egypt specifically as being the heir to Atlantis, which is taking the story even further back, linking to all these very potent ideas, but also trying to, in all the channel material from the Nine, it is this kind of idea of a spiritual takeover, of claiming everything as your own, because, the Nine claimed that, yes, they're the gods of ancient Egypt, but they also say that they are the people that sent Jesus. They also say that they are the people that sent Moses. And they link themselves with all these different religions, including the New Age ones, and then saying, basically, we're the thing that's behind all these religions. And one other thing we noted in the book, because it was very evident, and we didn't quite understand why when we wrote the book that this was, but it was just an observation that we made, that there is this attempt to try and claim all the religions, Judaism, Christianity, New Age, various Eastern religions, as being part of the Nine. There's even Mormonism, that's included in there. They claim to sort of be behind that. But the one religion that they didn't claim as their own was Islam. And in some of the material that comes from Nine sources, it actually portrays Islam in a very kind of negative light as being the dark side that's being that should be opposed by the people of light, which are the Council of Nine type. Now, when we wrote the book in 1998/99, that was just a simple observation that for some reason Islam's not included in this thing, and we didn't know why, other than that because a lot of stuff happened since then. Some of that people even at a kind of New Age level were being primed then to see Islam as being some kind of villain. And reading some of the stuff that we wrote, reading it back now actually kind of surprises us, and we wrote it.
Yeah, it definitely puts it into new light, considering all the things that have happened since 1999, and it makes you wonder. Even as far back as that Islam might have been, being targeted by somebody for some particular purpose, by the very fact that they weren't involved in this sort of syncretization that was going on with this particular group.
It just seems so conspicuous that that's the one religion that they don't want to claim as their own, and in fact, and material coming through some of their channels actually is, extremely negative. about it. Not negative about the followers of the religion, but just basically saying that they're the ones being fooled by the powers of darkness.
That's a laugh coming from them.
Had you come to a?
Another one of the scary things that we found, going into this thing. But it does still fit into a political agenda in that way. That even though it appears to be about, contact with extraterrestrial aliens, there's still a very kind of terrestrial political agenda incorporated within it.
But what really intrigues me is, that over the many, many years, 60 years now, that the Nine have been doing their stuff, sort of being channeled, etc. But they've made some terrible mistakes, and yet nobody, people just close their minds to the fact they've made mistakes. They prophesied, for example, in the late 70s there was going to be a mass landing of UFOs on the Earth. Well, I didn't notice that. And various other things, and they get some of their information completely wrong as well. But nobody picks them up on it. Well, we don't know how many people just turn their backs and go, of course. But it's just astonishing that they make like a lot of these things. They make these prophecies and predictions, which sort of ring very hollow when the date goes past and nothing's happened. Their followers are just too blinded by the glamour of the whole scenario to notice the mistakes and the glaring holes in the message.
Yes. Well, we recently had a similar experience with Harold Camping and the supposed rapture that came and went in May. So we see the sort of thing going on still, and he and his religious group still has devoted followers even after this happened. So we can certainly see that play out. One thing I wanted to pose to you is, and you kind of hinted at this a little bit in some of what you've said already. We've seen a couple of examples of this sort of apocalyptic UFO cult type behavior with like Heaven's Gate and the suicides of that particular group, and then we also had the rather strange saga of the Solar Temple, which had some overtones of this sort of thing. And with your equating the Nine and some of the material that had come out from the channeling sessions as being sort of the groundwork for the creation of a new sort of syncretistic religion, one could pose it, I suppose, that there may have been an effort by someone or some group to harness the ability to create a sort of apocalyptic cult out of this entire scenario for some nefarious purpose. And because we've had some backlash because of the negative experience that have come out of like Solar Temple and Heaven's Gate, perhaps, that entire scenario has been put on the back burner because people are not as enamored as they were in one sense. But then, on the other hand, we do have a veritable explosion in recent years of the very things that the Nine and the channeling of them were talking about during the time that this was at its height, and that is the ancient astronaut theory, the extraterrestrial interventionism. We've seen so many TV shows come and go, and movies about alien invasions, and all these things. So this meme has come back full circle and very strong. And do you suppose that some of the forces behind the original Nine group may still be at work, whether it be behind the scenes or working in some other fashion to sort of catch on to this new come around, as it were, for this sort of thing?
Well, I mean, there's no stopping them now. There's no stopping the likes of the CIA or MI5 from basically studying people's reactions to, as you say, apocalyptic material and the idea that ETs are here to save us, and or on the other hand, ETs are here to threaten us. And what movie was it? Was it Independence Day, where the American president himself saves the world? It's been. I think the various sort of scenarios connected with ET invasions have been played out in various movies and books. And I think people have a great hunger for that, because I think everybody's always looked to the skies, if it's just looking for inspiration at the stars. Everybody's always looked to the skies. I think that the agencies, shall we say, that were behind the 9 are still busy. They may have moved on slightly to other scenarios. We won't know, perhaps, for some time. But they just won't stop now. The momentum is, the whole idea of the gods as aliens, and the ETs are either here or they're about to be here. It's just now. It's in everybody's minds. It's just embedded in people's minds. It won't go away. So they've got to work with that. That's what they've got.
This is what we see very clearly today. Everything is so blatant now. It's almost as though I look at things that I see around me today as though I'm living in some sort of like surrealist nightmare, because the symbolism and dates and things that crop up so frequently and that are just offhandedly referred to in news media and in movies and things like this. It just seems like it's like in-your-face propaganda for something. I don't know what. Don't ask me what, because I don't know. But it just seems like there's this momentum and push towards something, and maybe it is, as you noted earlier, maybe it is aimed at 2012, the supposed end date of the Mayan calendar, and maybe this is a new target for something, whatever it happens to be. I wouldn't begin to guess what it might be, but one could pose at all kinds of different things, having to do with aliens or something completely different.
But one of the implications, which we certainly don't like, of all of this stuff, of falling at the feet of channelers who claim to be in touch with the ancient gods and all of this, is the implication is certainly a lot of the New Age. There's no way, for example, human beings could have built or come up with the idea anyway for the Great Pyramids, because they're far too mysterious and amazing. Human beings could never have built them. So obviously gods must have either built them or told people how to do them. And then there's the idea of getting so involved with the idea of the end of days, the apocalyptic stuff, and being so keen on it. It's like they hate the human race. They want us all to die, but built into this, reading between the lines of it, it's like people's will has been taken from them. The implication is you are going to be saved by the gods who are extraterrestrials. The meaning to everything is going to come from the stars in a very concrete form, and it's going to be all right one way or another, because it's nothing to do with humanity. Humanity's dirty and mean and nasty and evil, and you're either all going to be swept away, or there's a rapture, but it's all tied up with the gods, etc. And it's the implication being that there's contempt for the human race, but also at the same time it's inculcating a sort of lethargy, a sort of a refusal to rebel against certain ideas, a refusal to think for oneself, which is terrifying.
Also the sense that human beings aren't capable of controlling their own destiny, either individually or collectively. We need the gods in whatever form to tell us what to do. But of course, it's not the gods that tell us what to do. It's their intermediaries. It's the equivalent of the priesthood, which is what religion's always been about. And this attempt to create a new one, a 21st century religion, is, it's actually just the old religions kind of repackaged. Because when you look at the teachings of the Nine, probably many other kind of channeling type cults as well, when you boil what they're saying down, it's only actually sort of Christian ideas like the rapture, the second coming, all the things we're familiar with, just given a different name. The Nine are saying that there was going to be we're going into an end time where instead of the second coming, it will be the return of the gods in spaceships or whatever, and that there will be a cleansing of the earth, and the people that accept the truth will be saved. And it's exactly, it's the Book of Revelation updated. It's just the same ideas given again and again, because in the end it's about control.
Yeah, and also owing absolutely nothing to the real Egyptian gods. It's not remotely as they were. And, no Egyptian theology there at all,
No, and of course there is a very rich theological tradition in Egypt. Certainly, a lot of it is very uplifting, just as there is in other religions. But basically, as you point out, most religions basically boil down to the same kind of elements. They're very basic, and in some instances, of course, it all boils down to control. And when you look back at ancient Egyptian religion, obviously, there is a romantic element with the ancient past that people look at it as, in some ways, and some people, I'm not going to be broad brush about it and say that this is something that is universally held, of course, but there is sort of this idea that things were better and that people lived a better existence and all this kind of stuff. But when you look back at even Egyptian history, as you pointed out, who were the real powers in ancient Egypt? It was the priesthood, and it's quite clear that the priesthood were the people that had the knowledge, for how to build the pyramids, for how to do all of the things that they did. They were the ones that had the knowledge. And nobody else had it. That's what gave them the power to do the things that they did, because they held secret knowledge. They had the behind the scenes know-how to do the things that needed to be done, and that's what gave them their power. And this is sort of reflected in other religions as well. And it can be very potentially dangerous for people who are attempting to use that as a method of control over people.
Yeah, and certainly the thing that we feared is that that's what's being set up, because the traditional religions, Europe and America, with basically Christianity, largely don't have that control that they, or that hold over people that they used to have. In certain areas and certain countries, the churches are still very powerful, but by and large they're not. And you can almost think of the powers that be thinking, that story, the Christian story, the Jesus story, doesn't work anymore. What works in the 21st century? I know, aliens, they'll do. People know all about those. Let's mix this up. Get the Egyptian stuff. Let's mix it up with a bit of Star Trek. You can't get many more symbols than that.
Actually, of course, the reality, insofar as there is a reality about extraterrestrials, is that the only ones we seem to know about are bacteria from outer space. They're not exactly glamorous ancient Egyptian gods.
Yes, and now they're talking about maybe mushroom spores as well, so that might be another thing. We may have some evidence for alien intervention, the mushroom spores of the gods, as it were. But and that can certainly lead into a whole other area of discussion as well, with the psychedelics and whatnot, and their influence on ancient religions. I wanted to ask you very quickly about the Nine's possible involvement with the Psychic Super Kid program that was going on around about the same time that Puharich was involved with the Nine and channeling them.
That was a worrying episode because we don't really know what was going on, but knowing Puharich's approach to things and his connections, it does begin to worry. This is in the 1970s, just after he'd done the work with Yuri Geller. Puharich set up in Ossining another foundation. It was called Lab 9. And it was there to, again, do sort of parapsychological experiments. It was much more this time connected with the Nine channeling that was going on. That had now moved on to Phyllis Schlemmer was now the channel. They basically took in children from all kinds of different ages, teenagers and younger. And Puharich would try and develop their psychic abilities, and he would get them channeling the Nine. But the most disturbing thing about that whole period, which went on for about 3 or 4 years, is that there's very, very little documentation of what actually happened there. Basically experiments were going on with a group of children to actually see if they could try and do the same things that Yuri Geller could do, try and find ways of enhancing their psychic abilities. But our suspicion on that very much like the Round Table Foundation back in the 50s seemed to be just this public foundation that was doing paranormal research, whereas in the background it was actually being funded by the Pentagon. The period that Puharich is working with these kids at Lab 9 also coincides with him doing work for, I think we all know about the during the early 1970s, or throughout the 1970s, that the CIA and the Pentagon were experimenting with psychic abilities, particularly remote viewing. I think we all kind of know that story of the remote viewers. These various projects, one of which was called Project Stargate, which is partly where we got the name for the book from. Puharich was definitely involved in that, which was stuff going on at a place called an institute called SRI International in California, but it's actually being funded by the CIA. Now, at the same time, he's doing what seems to be kind of private research with a group, similar research with remote viewing and other ways of enhancing paranormal abilities, but with children. And you actually think, well, if the Pentagon and the CIA wanted to include children in their paranormal research program, they would probably actually get quite a lot of, they probably wouldn't be allowed to, but they probably want to do it. They're experimenting with adults that have volunteered for these remote viewing experiments, but if they wanted to involve children, they can't really do it. Well, what's the best way of doing that? Well, let's get somebody to set up a private foundation, a charismatic individual who can, charm parents into handing their children over to do this research, and nobody's going to complain about that. And so the worrying thing is that there was very little documentation of what happened. It's said that some of the children came out of that time being very disturbed by things they the experience they had there, but so very little is really known about what was happening. This Lab 9, incidentally, was also a time where it received lots of visitors from scientists. There were politicians. There were other people always turning up there. So it was quite a sort of quite a busy place. But these actual experiments, what they call the space kids, it is one of the more disturbing periods. Partly because so little was actually recorded about it. and think, how often does that happen? That somebody will get a bunch of children from, sort of about 10 through to late teens, and put them in a place and start doing paranormal experiments with them.
Well, there was a similar, but only up to a point, series of experiments at London University, all connected again with Uri Geller. I mean, he was tested there by Professor John Hasted, who's I believe a physicist, unfortunately dead now. But and then afterwards, and lots of stuff Uri did was amazing there. And then afterwards, Hasted did some experiments with children. He sort of mini metal benders, I think he called them. But it was a much more transparent sort of, setup than the Puharich thing. I think the press went there. Sort of some media attention. It was a sort of jolly thing for the kids to do, and there's no question of them being disturbed in any way. Whereas the Puharich thing, as Clive said, Puharich was obviously a charmer, and could charm the kids to some extent. But again, he just very coldly had his eyes set on the goal, and the goal for him was knowledge. And he would do anything, he'd tread on anybody to get it. And that's, and even if they were children.
Yes, and that is a rather disturbing episode for the very reasons that you outlined, and that is the fact that we really don't know what happened there to any great extent. And that place sort of just came and went, and was sort of like swept under the rug of history, as it were. And it's always been one of those areas that I've been interested in trying to find out more about, but unfortunately there's just very little information to go by. And the fact that he named it Lab 9 is obviously significant, and the fact that the 9 themselves were involved there with Puharich does have certain connotations to it that may not be very good as far as ultimate outcomes goes for the children. It would be interesting if anybody would eventually come forward, that had been involved with those experiments and give some background on what exactly was being done there. But I don't expect that we'll hear anything. Unfortunately.
It's pure speculation, but I wouldn't be at all surprised, personally, if a high percentage of them didn't turn out to be alien abductees, in quotes, with the whole sort of horror of it.
And did you? Yeah, and I think I think that's probably correct, because as we noted earlier, there is this sort of overlap between these types of phenomenon. Whenever you have people engaging in activities which open up altered states of consciousness, it does overlap with other types of paranormal phenomenon, whether it be poltergeist activity or alien interaction. These sorts of things seem to go together for whatever reason. They may have the same ultimate origin point, perhaps. Did either of you or both of you come to a firm conclusion regarding the 9 themselves as to whether or not what these channelers were channeling was something that was originating from a non-human source, or it was not? Or are you just up in the air still about that?
Well, we have our views. In the book, we don't come to a firm conclusion, because on the evidence, on the information we've got, you can't. Sometimes you can look at it and say these are discarnate entities, but they're certainly not the gods of ancient Egypt. At other times, you can think, it's just Puharich hypnotizing people and playing around with them and seeing what he can do. But the important thing, as far as the book was concerned, we say this stuff was happening, and it's constructing this new belief system. Our personal conclusion is: were they discarnate entities, or was it Puharich playing around? Probably a bit of both, because we do believe in discarnate entities, but as Lynn was saying earlier, we think they're they're tricksters. In some ways, dependent upon people for their own to give them form. John Keel wrote a lot about this with his experience with the ultra-terrestrials. The conclusion that, or the box that Lynn and I would put things in is really the ultra-terrestrial box. They're not extraterrestrial. They're not, products of the subconscious mind, although that plays a part in it. But really going to the ultra-terrestrial one, I think Lynn would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes. There's too many tricks involved. There's too much tricksiness involved. In the whole ET thing. Decent. I mean, obviously, with such a widespread phenomenon, you are going to get liars. You're going to get people who are fantasists. You're going to get people who are frauds. But you're also going to get a massive, percentage of people who are telling the truth of their experiences as they perceived it. And these people have stories to tell that are as absurd as my story of having a vision of the woman who told me I was the wrong one. People who are given, taken into spaceships and given strange pancakes that they're told are, made out of material from beyond the stars, and then when it's analysed, it's just buckwheat,
Right.
I mean, basically, these people, nothing worse happens to them on the whole than they get egg on their face and shown up in the media, which in itself can be pretty hard going. But sometimes, people are driven to the edge of suicide by it, and just as we have met people who have been driven to the edge of suicide by poltergeists.
Yes.
And these things are very difficult to control because they are literally awesome. There's something out. They're scary by their very nature, and the scariness is kind of the main thing about them, really. But yeah, I mean, it's the ultra-terrestrials, I think, are deeply embedded, whether they caused it or not, deeply embedded in the whole ET thing.
I think the suspicion that we have is, looking at Puharich's career and his interests, is that, for all the things we've said about Puharich, he was no fool. He understood about the nature of discarnate entities from esoteric tradition, from, if he trained as a Hawaiian shaman, and, shaman understand that there are good entities, bad entities, trickster entities. They kind of are trained how to handle this. And Puharich would have known all that. He wouldn't have thought, if I can get people channeling entities and these entities say they're the gods of ancient Egypt, then I'll believe it. He knew they were tricksters. But his career seems to have been to find out if he could control them. Not if, I think it wasn't so much about, for him, about a group of people sitting at the feet of the 9 channelers and nodding their heads in agreement on all these words of wisdom that are dispensed to them. So in a way the channeler is controlling the group through that. I think Puharich was trying to see how much control he could take over the source. Which is, something magicians have always tried to do. Try to get hold of these entities. And if you could control them, what can you use them for? You can use them for more than just convincing people to follow them. There was a lot of phenomena happening around these groups that people from quite outside and quite independent witnesses observed things like poltergeist activity happening, in the places where the 9 were being channeled, and that appears to be very genuine. And I think our suspicion, although it's not one of those things we can prove with a hard and fast way, that what motivated Puharich was seeing how you could control those and how you could get these entities working for you. Now, given that Puharich has spent a lot of his career, probably all of it, working for government agencies, everyone from NASA and the Atomic Energy Commission through to the CIA and the Army. He was definitely part of, during the 1950s, while he was doing the experiments at the Round Table Foundation, he was still in the Army. He was a captain in the Army working in its psychological warfare department in projects that were held jointly with the CIA and MK Ultra team. If we're right, and that was Puharich's motivation to try and control these entities, and he's doing that on behalf of the CIA and people, another really scary scenario comes out of that. You're thinking, well, is it those people that want to try and harness these forces?
Mm-hmm. Who would want to tame God? I mean, it sort of is a contradiction in terms, really.
Yes, it is. It is. I think that we've heard these kind of stories before in relation to paranormal phenomenon. I've heard them from several researchers where we've had definite government involvement. Nick Redfern has referred to a particular group in his book Final Events, talking about a particular group that had come to a conclusion about aliens being demonic entities, and their interaction with another shady group inside of government in some capacity that is trying to actively make deals with these beings in some fashion to get access to their technology. Phil Imbrogno's talked about this before. He's run into this a couple of times in his research as well, where governments have shown an interest in trying to capture or in some way control this type of phenomenon in some fashion, and that's not in any way outlandish to suppose, because anything that is outside the realm of government control is open for exploitation as far as they're concerned, because obviously they want as many parameters as they can to be understood, known quantities, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see agents or agencies in the government, or even unofficial government agencies subcontracted through corporations, universities, or what have you, doing this type of work and trying to harness the energy of this sort of thing. And seeing that Puharich might have been sort of like a trailblazer in some regards, being sort of semi-independent with the kind of work that he was doing, but still answering back to his masters, so to speak, with the findings of his research and whatnot, and that's sort of what happened with the entire mind control MK Ultra program, which was basically turned over to private industry so that it would disappear from official government records, and no one could follow it anymore.
I hope that too many of your tax dollars aren't being invested in some massive program to try and work closely and with ultra-terrestrials, because they, by their very nature, are tricksters. It'd be like trying to knit water. It just wouldn't work.
I agree. I mean, I don't see any ultimate purpose in doing it myself. I think the point I was trying to make was that our government agencies throughout their history have not always done things that follow logical or rational thought. So, the fact that they would be pursuing something like this, trying to tame such a force as this, whatever it may be, ultra-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, whatever term you want to use, but trying to harness that in any way, it seems completely doomed to failure, because no matter what kind of agreement you would reach with any of these entities or beings, there's no guarantee that tomorrow they'll just completely forget that anything was done and just go about their business as if you didn't exist, because we're dealing with something that is outside the realm of human knowledge and understanding, and I think that that's the mistake that I pointed to earlier, is the anthropomorphizing that people do with this particular phenomenon, which is the downfall for many whenever they try to understand it or to put it into a box to do it. But yeah, I agree with you. It really sounds stupid to me, but to government agencies that have done the things that they have done in the past, it doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility at all. I mean, that was pretty much the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, I think you've got two in the 9 story. There's 2 reasons for that kind of intelligence agency, Defense Department interest in it. One, you've got this potential for, as they see it, of useful knowledge that you could gain, or some way of, if they believe they could try and control these entities, so give them some form of power, some form of information. But the other side to it, and it's something that we've found that intelligence agencies in particular are very interested in, is just about belief, the phenomena of belief. Because in terms of psychological warfare, in misinformation exercises, the thing they really want to know about is how belief works. How can you persuade this group of people to believe this thing? How outlandish a thing can you get certain people to believe in? And there's been a lot of experiments, within the MK Ultra, under that umbrella, but in other projects as well. Manipulating cult belief, starting a belief, seeing how you can stop it. So that potential for experimentation was also in the whole 9 setup. So, even if they're not looking at the actually using these entities in some way or understanding these entities, they're still also interested in the potential, well, first of all, to experiment with just the how belief works, how you can manipulate belief, how you can use belief. That's all in there too. So you can see why they were so interested in keeping this work going, for all kinds of reasons.
Well, that would be at the very core of propaganda, and that's one of the things that they are very, very astute at. But we're fast approaching the end of the show here. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to tell the audience what you're working on right now. Do you have a new book that's out, and what kind of research that you guys are actually engaging in now?
Well, yes, we've just had a book come out called The Forbidden Universe, The Occult Origins of Science and the Search for the Mind of God.
Oh, that sounds pretty good.
Actually, it's looking at, it's specifically about the Hermetic tradition, those ancient texts known as the Hermetica, and the influence that the first part of the book looks at the influence they had over the origins of science. So the first part is more kind of historical, really showing that actually what we could now call the scientific revolution, and what most historians of science look back on as this great period of rationality that they call the scientific revolution, was entirely driven by those texts, and basically all the great discoveries of that period were taken out of them, taken directly from these texts, which we believe do go back to ancient Egypt. So we're doing our ancient Egypt kick as well. And then we sort of, in the second part of the book, look at some of the implications for modern science.
Well, and that's certainly a very keen field of interest for a lot of people. I've seen an explosion of interest recently in alchemy and Hermeticism in general, and certainly it sounds like a very fascinating book. to look at the origins of modern science through the lens of the Hermetic arts from the past. Very interesting subject. I think this all sort of goes together, kind of in a way, because Hermeticism and alchemy also had philosophical and religious tenets as well, and you know. We've been skirting around the issue of religion and belief and this sort of thing, and talking about the Nine today with the Stargate Conspiracy, and sort of bringing in the UFO phenomenon and ETs and ultra-terrestrials, and you know, even to borrow Mac Tawney's phrase, the idea of crypto-terrestrials as well, just the entire panoply of the phenomenon that we're experiencing today in media so explosively is putting a lot of these ideas in the minds of people, and I think it's really great that we have researchers who are actively engaged in trying to understand this and bring this information out for people to look at and come to their own conclusions. And it was my great pleasure today to have both of you on the show, Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. Again, you can check them out at their website, Picknett-Prince.com, and they do have a new book out, and of course I highly recommend the Stargate Conspiracy as well if you're interested in the topic that we have been discussing today. Lynn and Clive, thank you very much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the work that you did in the book, and I want to thank you both very much for spending the evening with us here on the Stench of Truth radio show.
Well, thank you for inviting us on.
Thank you very much. And by the way, it's Picknett with 2 T's.
Oh, yes. Very good. Picknett with 2 T's, Prince.com. Yes. Yeah, that's their website. It's got everything on there that you need to find their books and to find out about them. And definitely go there and check it out and support their research and work. And thank you both again very much for spending the time with us today.
Yes,
lovely. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
okay,
you
guys have a great day.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, that was Clive and Lynn, and we were talking about the Stargate Conspiracy and the 9 channeled entities known as the Ennead, or said to be the Ennead of ancient Egypt. I hope you enjoyed the show today. This was my debut episode here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com, and you can join me next week again from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Fridays here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com for another episode of The Stench of Truth. I am Ted Torbett, your host, and I'll invite you to stay tuned for Jamie Havokin and Inception Radio, which follows this show. So thank you all for listening, and join me again next week, 7 to 9 p.m., and I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.
It's not a class warfare against the rich guy who lives up on the hill in your fucking town against you. No, because that rich guy who lives up on the fucking hill in your town is the same as you in the eyes of the people who are really running the fucking show.
What happened to us, my beautiful? Since the day that you went, you come back to tell me that your position is not what I think is good for this man. I'll never hear anymore. There's only peace and nevermore. Look around you, there's no one left to complain to. Just when you needed some help, they'll move the ground to despite you.
We have to resist. Non-compliance. At every fucking turn. Resist.
create with our hands. And just when you thought that you've built up resistance, they'll stop on by to take hold of your land. You'll never see any more